Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, with a brief look at the opposition Roosevelt faced, where it came from and what it wanted or didn't want him to do. Now, opposition to Roosevelt can be neatly divided between those who wanted him to do more and those who thought he had done far too much as it was. So let's take a look at what they had to say. The Democrat governor of Louisiana, Huey Long, criticised the New Deal for being too complex and too bureaucratic, and of not doing enough to help the poor. He proposed a Share Our Wealth scheme, calling for personal wealth to be capped, and that every American family should be given $5,000 as a lump sum. He also thought big corporations and businesses should be taxed more, and the money used to build more roads, schools, and hospitals. He called for a minimum wage of $2,000 a year, at a time when half of Americans earned less than that. He wanted to cut the working week. He wanted houses for veterans, as well as paying the war bonus, free education and pensions for everyone aged 60 or over. He said he would make every man a king. Roosevelt thought he was one of the two most dangerous men in America, General MacArthur being the most dangerous. He was actually murdered in 1935 by a man who had a personal grudge against him. Father Coughlin, the radio priest, with an audience of some 30 million Americans, approximately a third of the population, listening to his Sunday evening programs at its peak, accused the president of giving too much money to bankers and businessmen and not doing enough to help the poor. He established the National Union for Social Justice, which gained as many as 7 million members across America. But his own solutions were too radical, too socialist for most Americans. Amongst other things, he called for key industries to be nationalized, heavy taxes for the rich so that their wealth could be redistributed, and he called for a minimum wage too. The third do more advocate was Dr. Townsend. He proffered a simple solution. He suggested that everyone aged 60 and above should quit their jobs and receive a pension of $200 a month, though it had to be spent within the month so as to stimulate jobs. Many older people liked his idea. Why wouldn't they? And some 7,000 Townsend clubs were set up across the country. But though Roosevelt faced criticism for not doing enough, there were more who thought that he was doing too much. After all, though Roosevelt had been swept back to power in 1936, more than 16 million Americans had voted for the Republican candidate. This should not be surprising to us. Remember, 3 out of 4 Americans were still in work, and the New Deal had to be paid for, and this meant taxes. When, as far as Republicans were concerned, America had been built and made a great power on the principles of individual effort, self-reliance, and minimal government involvement. The basic objection was that Roosevelt allowed government to be too interventionist, too involved in economic life. Republicans complained that by providing so much support, the Democrats were weakening the American spirit, their reliance on self-help. Republicans, after all, still held to their belief in laissez-faire and rugged individualism. Republicans went so far as to accuse Roosevelt of acting like a dictator, acting in the same way as Stalin and Hitler. Not only was he giving too much power to the government, but he was centralizing that power in his own hands. Some state governors agreed, arguing that the New Deal's laws conflicted with the rights of state governments. The NRA and the TVA in particular were seen as too much like the central economic planning associated with the Soviet Union. They would undermine the American way, making people dependent on government help. Republicans also criticized the complicated array of codes and regulations and the huge cost of the New Deal's schemes. They also argued that the New Deal was wasting taxpayers' money. The WPA, for example, was criticized for paying people to do unnecessary jobs. Business leaders also criticized Roosevelt for interfering in their businesses. Roosevelt's support of trade unionism angered them, as did his campaign to raise wages. Such things, they argued, should be left to market forces. They also complained that the NRA, with its codes and regulations, was bureaucratic and added to their costs. Whilst they also complained about schemes like the TVA, which they argued meant that the government competed unfairly with privately owned businesses. They further argued that high taxes only discouraged people from working hard and gave money to people for doing nothing, or else doing jobs that weren't needed. The wealthy in general resented the higher taxes they were obliged to pay. They thought Roosevelt was a traitor to his class. Wealth, they argued, repeating the criticism of businessmen, was the result of hard work, and high taxes a disincentive to work hard. In 1934, a group of businessmen backed by the wealthy DuPont family formed the Liberty League to oppose the New Deal and campaign against it. The Liberty League argued that the New Deal was a threat to freedom, a threat to the American way of life, and that Roosevelt was little different to fascists like Mussolini and Hitler. So Roosevelt was seen as both too much like a communist and too much like a fascist. And as you know, in 1935, the Supreme Court ruled that the National Industrial Recovery Act, and so the work of the National Recovery Administration, the NRA, was unconstitutional. In another ruling in 1936, the Supreme Court ruled that measures taken by the Agricultural Adjustment Administration were also unconstitutional. Now, I can't go into the details of the cases and the rulings in this presentation, nor Roosevelt's response, but suffice to say, it threw America into a constitutional crisis. So, a useful overview of the opposition Roosevelt faced, I hope. I do, as always, thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so, and tell your friends about it too. Good luck with your studies. Cheers.